Welcome to the back room. Relax, unwind, and let our soothing gangster bedtime stories guide you into calm and peaceful sleep. Here we tell the quieter side of history, the childhoods, ambitions, and lives of legendary gangsters, without focusing on violence. As you settle in, share with us in the comments where you're listening from, what time it is right now, and one good thing that's happened to you today. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy our stories, please like this video to support the channel, and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Your encouragement helps us bring more Mafia bedtime stories to life. Now close your eyes, feel at ease, and enjoy tonight's story. Wishing you peace and the sweetest dreams.
Listen closely. The sound of true power is not a scream. It is not the roar of an engine, nor the chaotic rattle of gunfire echoing through a crowded street. Those are the sounds of desperation, the clumsy noises of men trying to force the world to bend to their will. True power is quiet. In a high-rise office suspended above the city of Santiago de Cali, the only sound is the rhythmic, deliberate click of a fountain pen capping and uncapping. Click, click. It is a small, precise noise, sharp as a scalpel, cutting through the heavy silence of the room. Outside, the Colombian night is alive. The tropical heat is a physical weight pressing against the glass, thick with humidity and the scent of exhaust, roasting coffee and damp earth. Down there, the city breathes in a chaotic rhythm of salsa music, shouting voices, and the frantic energy of a million souls hustling to survive. But up here on the top floor, the air is cool, dry, and perfectly still. The air conditioning hums a low, hypnotic lullaby, sealing this space off from the messy reality below. It is a sanctuary of artificial winter in the middle of the equator. In the center of this chilled silence sits a man. He is not surrounded by bodyguards with machine guns. There are no piles of cocaine on the desk, no gold-plated pistols on display. Instead, the room smells of lemon polish and old paper. The desk is a vast expanse of dark, polished mahogany, reflecting the dim light of the lamp like a black mirror. On it, pristine rows of financial ledgers are aligned with geometric perfection, their corners sharp, their contents dense with numbers. The man behind the desk adjusts his glasses. He looks less like a warlord and more like a university professor, or perhaps a senior bank manager working late to balance the accounts. His hair is neatly combed, his shirt pressed to a crisp whiteness that defies the climate. He is Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela. They call him El Ajedrecista, the chess player. It is a name earned not through bloodshed, though blood is certainly part of the equation, but through a terrifying capacity for logic. While others in his trade play checkers, reacting impulsively, flipping the board when they are losing, relying on brute force to clear the path, Gilberto plays a longer, quieter game. He understands that violence is a business expense, and like all expenses, it should be minimized. It is messy. It draws attention. It is bad for the bottom line. He leans back in his leather chair, the material creaking softly, and swivels to face the window. Below him, Cali sprawls out like a circuit board of amber and white lights, a grid of energy that he has learned to manipulate. He does not look at the city with the hunger of a conqueror who wants to burn it down. He looks at it with the cold, affectionate gaze of an engineer who understands exactly how the machine works. At this moment in history, the world's eyes are fixed a few hundred miles to the north, on Medellin. There, Pablo Escobar is waging a war of terror, blowing up airliners, assassinating ministers, and turning the streets into rivers of blood. Escobar wants to be loved, feared, and worshipped. He screams his name from the rooftops. Gilberto finds this distasteful. It is vulgar. It is inefficient. Here in Cali, the philosophy is different. The gentlemen of Cali do not want to be famous. They want to be wealthy. They do not want to fight the state. They want to buy it. They believe that every man has a price, from the street cop to the senator, and that a briefcase full of cash is a far more effective weapon than a stick of dynamite. Why destroy a system when you can simply own it? Gilberto picks up the fountain pen again. He runs his thumb over the gold nib. He opens a ledger. The numbers in these columns represent tons of merchandise, millions of dollars, and a logistical network that spans the globe. But to him, they are just variables in an equation he has already solved. The atmosphere in the room is heavy with intellect. It is a cerebral kind of danger. If you were to sit across from him, you would not feel the immediate, visceral threat of physical violence. You would feel something more unsettling, the sensation of being analyzed, disassembled, and categorized. You would feel that he knows your mortgage payments, your children's names, and your deepest vulnerabilities before you have even introduced yourself. He writes a figure in the margin of the page. His handwriting is small, cramped, and meticulous. This is how an empire is built, not with grand speeches, but with small, daily acts of administration. The cocaine trade in his hands is stripped of its grime. It is sanitized. It is treated with the same corporate rigor as the export of coffee or cut flowers. He believes he has discovered the secret that eludes all other criminals. He believes he can impose order on chaos. He thinks that if he is smart enough, careful enough, and quiet enough, he can walk between the raindrops without getting wet. He believes he can commit the crime without becoming the criminal. The hum of the air conditioner deepens, a drone that seems to vibrate in the bones. Shadows stretch across the room as the night deepens. In the corner, a grandfather clock ticks, tock, 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 marking the passage of time. It is a reminder that even for a master strategist, the clock is always running. But for now, Gilberto feels only the cool reassurance of control. He looks at the ledger, then out at the city, and then back to the page. The variables are set. The pieces are in position. The opening moves have been made and the board is wide open. He is the spider in the center of a web made of silk and steel, a web that stretches from the jungles of Peru to the nightclubs of New York, from the banks of Panama to the ports of Europe. And he sits here, in the shadows, pulling the strings with such gentle precision that the world doesn't even know it is trapped. Most men go into this business because they are hungry or angry or desperate. Gilberto is none of these things. He is simply ambitious in the way a CEO is ambitious. He wants to monopolize the market. He wants to streamline the supply chain. He wants to retire with a legacy of gold, not lead. It is a seductive arrogance. It is the hubris of the intellectual who thinks he can outsmart the devil. He closes the ledger with a soft thud. The sound is final, like a gavel striking a judge's bench. He places the pen perfectly parallel to the book. Everything has its place. Everything is in order. He stands up and walks to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Behind him, the empty chair waits. The game has begun, and the chess player is ready to make his move. But in the silence of the room, beneath the hum of the cooling air, there is a whisper of something else. A subtle tension, a hint that perhaps, just perhaps, the game is more dangerous than even he realizes. Because in chess, every piece can be sacrificed, and even the king can be cornered. But tonight, the city belongs to him. The silence belongs to him. And as he looks down at the lights of Cali, shimmering like a sea of diamonds in the dark, he allows himself a rare, thin smile. It is the smile of a man who knows something the rest of the world is just about to find out. To understand the man who would eventually hold the world's cocaine trade in the palm of his hand, we must step back from the cold, hermetically sealed office of his peak years. We must travel back in time, stripping away the layers of wealth and notoriety, until we find the seed from which the empire grew. Often in stories of crime, we expect the origin to be a place of squalor. We expect a narrative of desperate survival, of a child clawing his way out of the gutter with bloody fingernails, driven by a primal hunger for bread and safety. But Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela was not a creature of the gutter. His ambition was not a fire kindled by rage. It was a blueprint drawn by a quiet, calculating mind. The setting is Santiago de Cali in the 1970s. It is a city that feels like a living, breathing organism. The air is thick and sweet, heavy with the scent of burning sugar cane from the plantations that surround the valley like a green sea. It is a city of rhythm. The salsa music spills out of every doorway, a frantic, joyful beat that pulses through the pavement, moving the hips of the rich and the poor alike. The heat is democratic. It presses down on everyone, shimmering off the tin roofs of the barrios and the tiled terraces of the colonial mansions. In the midst of this vibrant, sweating chaos, Gilberto moved with a distinct coolness. He was a young man who looked at the world not as a battlefield but as a marketplace. Where others saw obstacles, he saw inefficiencies. Where others saw laws, he saw negotiable guidelines. He did not want to burn the city down. He wanted to own the mortgage. His entry into the world of commerce was deceptively mundane. Before the planes and the submarines, there was a pharmacy. Imagine the sensory reality of that small business. The smell of rubbing alcohol in cardboard boxes. The dusty warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the glass front, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The sound of a bell chiming as a customer enters. Behind the counter, Gilberto was learning the art of the transaction. He discovered a profound truth in those early days. People trust a man in a clean shirt who speaks softly. He learned that legitimacy is often just a costume, a performance of reliability. He counted the pesos at the end of the day, the paper bills soft and worn, smelling of the hands they had passed through. He realized that money, regardless of its source, has no memory. It spends the same whether it comes from selling aspirin or something far more potent. It was in these back rooms, amidst the inventory of pills and syrups, that the core of the gentleman of Cali began to form. He brought in his brother, Miguel. Miguel was different, more intense, more detail-oriented, the kind of man who would check a lock 3 times before sleeping. If Gilberto was the architect, Miguel was the engineer, the one who ensured the walls would hold the weight of their growing ambition. Then there was cheap Santa Cruz Lindoño, a man of worldly appetites and sharp instincts. Together, they formed a triumvirate that operated less like a street gang and more like a board of directors. Their recruitment strategy was unique in the underworld. In Medellin, loyalty was often enforced through terror. A gun to the head, a threat to the family. In Cali, Gilberto introduced a radical concept, mutual prosperity. He sat across from potential partners in quiet social clubs where the ceiling fans turned lazily overhead and the waiters moved with silent discretion. He poured them drinks. He asked about their children. He didn't demand their submission. He offered them a share price. Why fight over crumbs, he would argue, his voice level and reasonable, when we can own the bakery? This approach birthed the philosophy that would define the Cali Cartel. Buy the system, don't fight it. Gilberto viewed the Colombian state not as an enemy fortress to be stormed, but as a service provider to be contracted. He understood the sociology of corruption better than any sociologist. He knew that a bribe, when presented correctly, does not feel like a crime. It feels like a favor between friends. It feels like a gift. Imagine the scene. A police captain or a local politician sits in a dimly lit restaurant. Gilberto slides an envelope across the table. He doesn't look furtive. He looks benevolent. He smiles. He talks about the difficulties of the economy, the low wages of public service. He frames the money not as payment for silence, but as assistance for a man trying to do his best for his family. He allows the recipient to keep their dignity. In doing so, he purchased something far more valuable than temporary safety. He purchased loyalty. He wove the cartel into the fabric of the city's social life until it was impossible to tell where the crime ended and the establishment began. This distaste for violence was Gilberto's signature. It wasn't that he was morally opposed to killing, he was practically opposed to it. Violence brings headlines. Headlines bring police. Police bring disruption. To Gilberto, a dead body in the street was a failure of management. It was a sign that the negotiation had broken down. It was sloppy. "We are bankers," he would tell his associates, "not bandits." This was the great lie. the foundational cognitive dissonance that allowed him to sleep soundly in his bed. He compartmentalized his life with the same rigid precision he applied to his ledgers. On one side of the wall, he was the loving father, the generous patron of the arts, the respectable businessman who donated to charities and attended mass. On the other side, he was the head of a criminal conspiracy flooding the world with narcotics. He believed he could keep these two worlds separate. He believed that if he wore the mask of the gentleman long enough, it would become his true face. He convinced himself that he was providing a service for a demand he didn't create, merely facilitating a transaction between the coca fields of the Andes and the nostrils of the American consumer. As the 1970s bled into the 80s, the pharmacy expanded. The ambitions grew. The envelopes became suitcases. The backroom whispers became international conference calls, but the core ethos remained unchanged. The young man who had stood behind the counter, smelling the dust and the rubbing alcohol, had not disappeared. He had simply found a bigger product to sell. The sun sets over Cali, turning the sky a bruised purple. The shadows lengthen in the valley, creeping up the sides of the mountains. Gilberto walks out of his office, nodding politely to the doorman, shaking hands with a neighbor. He looks so normal, so unremarkable. And that is the terrifying genius of his ambition. It was quiet. It did not announce itself with a trumpet blast. It grew like a vine, slow and silent, wrapping itself around the pillars of society, climbing higher and higher, until the structure itself was held up by the very thing that was strangling it. He walks into the evening, a man who believes he has solved the riddle of crime. He believes he can touch the darkness without being stained by it. But as the city lights flicker on around him, one by one, he cannot see the future that is waiting. He cannot see that the darkness is not something you touch. It is something that touches you. And once it has left its mark, no amount of money, no amount of manners, and no amount of logic can ever wash it away. The gentlemen of Cali had arrived, and they brought with them a new kind of war, a war fought with smiles, signatures, and silence. The map of the world, when viewed through the eyes of a logistics master, is not a collection of nations defined by borders or flags. It is a circulatory system. It is a vast, pulsing network of veins and arteries, shipping lanes that cut through the black Atlantic, flight paths that arc over the curvature of the earth, rail lines that stitch together the industrial heartlands of continents. Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela stood before this map, not as a conqueror seeking territory, but as a physician monitoring the pulse of a patient. To him, the global economy was a living thing, a beast of endless consumption, and he had found a way to inject his own product into its bloodstream, so seamlessly that the beast never even felt the needle prick. The expansion of the Cali Cartel was not an explosion, it was an infiltration. It did not announce itself with the crude violence of a takeover. Instead, it dissolved into the existing flow of global commerce like sugar dissolving in hot tea. Leave the warm, sugar-scented air of Colombia for a moment. Transport yourself to the gray, biting cold of a dockyard in New Jersey or the rain-swept container terminals of Rotterdam. Here, the air smells of brine, diesel fumes, and wet rusted steel. The sky is a flat sheet of slate. The soundtrack to this world is industrial and heavy. The mournful groan of cranes lifting 20-ton containers, the screech of metal wheels on tracks, the deep, guttural thrum of ship engines idling in the harbor. In this landscape of steel and concrete, anonymity is the only currency that matters. Millions of containers move through these ports every year. They are the red blood cells of the global economy, carrying cars, electronics, grain, and textiles. Gilberto understood a simple statistical truth. They cannot check them all. They cannot even check 1%. And so, the empire became invisible. The cocaine that left the laboratories in the jungle did not look like contraband. It looked like commerce. It was hidden with a creativity that bordered on artistic genius. Imagine cedar boards stacked high on pallets, destined for construction sites in Florida. The wood smells rich and resinous, But inside, the boards have been hollowed out, the white powder packed tight and sealed, invisible to the eye, undetectable to the nose. Imagine heavy concrete posts, cured and solid, waiting to be sunk into the ground for fences in the Midwest. They are cold to the touch, heavy, boring. Yet suspended within the concrete matrix, encased in lead to fool the X-ray machines, lies the fortune. Imagine frozen broccoli, thousands of bags of it, frosted with ice, sitting in the sub-zero hold of a cargo ship. The cold is biting. The air is thick with the fog of condensation. Who looks twice at frozen vegetables? Who suspects that the ice itself is chemically treated, or that the packaging conceals a product worth more than the ship that carries it? This was the brilliance of the Cali method. They did not smuggle drugs. They smuggled legitimate goods that happened to carry drugs. They bought the lumber yards. They bought the concrete factories. They bought the frozen food distribution centers. They integrated vertically, controlling every link in the chain, turning the cartel into a shadow mirror of a multinational logistics firm. But the physical concealment was only half the puzzle. The true genius lay in the human architecture. Gilberto and his partners constructed a system based on absolute isolation. They called it the cell structure. In the chaotic world of Medellin, everyone knew everyone. A captured street dealer could point a finger at a lieutenant, who could point a finger at Escobar. It was a chain of dominoes waiting to fall. In the Cali system, the dominoes were placed in separate rooms. The manager of a distribution cell in Queens, New York, wore a suit and carried a pager. He knew his job: receive the shipment, store it, wait for the signal. He did not know the name of the man who shipped it from Colombia. He did not know the names of the street-level dealers who would eventually sell it. He knew only a voice on a phone, a code number, a drop location. If he was arrested, he had nothing to trade. He could not bring down the empire because he could not see the empire. He saw only his tiny, windowless corner of it. The left hand did not just ignore the right hand. The left hand didn't even know the right hand existed. Back in Cali, in the quiet of his office, Gilberto tracked it all. To him, this separation was beautiful. It was clean. He derived a profound, almost spiritual satisfaction from the order of it. He would sit for hours, reviewing the telexes and the fax reports that spit out of his machines in long, curling ribbons of thermal paper. Shipment 402 arrived, customs cleared, inventory stored. He did not see the addiction that would bloom on the streets of American cities. He did not see the cracked dens, the shattered families, the violence of the street corners where the product was finally consumed. That was the messy reality of the retail end, and he had insulated himself from it by oceans and layers of bureaucracy. What he saw was the purity of the mechanism. He saw a puzzle that he had solved. He felt the dopamine hit of a stock trader watching his portfolio rise, or a grandmaster watching his opponent walk into a trap. It was the thrill of competence. He was moving tons of an illicit substance across the most heavily guarded borders on Earth, right under the noses of the most powerful government in history, and he was doing it with the humdrum regularity of a postal service. The atmosphere of this invisible empire was one of quiet, terrifying efficiency. It existed in the negative spaces of the legal world. It was in the pause between a customs officer's questions. It was in the silence of a warehouse at midnight, where dust motes danced in the beam of a flashlight. It was in the unremarkable sedan driving within the speed limit on an interstate highway, its trunk filled with cash vacuum-sealed in plastic to reduce the bulk. Gilberto admired the discipline of his overseas managers. He paid them well, treated them like executives, and expected professional results. There were no cowboys in the Cali organization. Cowboys get noticed. Cowboys get caught. He hired accountants, lawyers, logistics experts. He sent his sons to study business administration in the United States and Europe, preparing them to inherit a kingdom that existed everywhere and nowhere. As the money rolled in, not in bags but in pallets, so much cash that they had to write off a percentage annually to rot and rats because they couldn't launder it fast enough, Gilberto remained calm. He did not buy a golden zoo. He did not run for president. He simply bought more businesses, a bank, a chain of pharmacies, a radio station network. He was weaving the cartel so tightly into the fabric of daily life that to extract it would be to unravel the economy itself. In the cool air of his office, surrounded by the soft hum of technology, he felt untouchable. He looked at the map on the wall, tracing the invisible lines that connected the ports of Buenaventura to Miami, New York to Houston, Hamburg to Genoa. He saw a world that had surrendered to him without a fight. The wind whistles through the rail yards of New Jersey, rattling the locks on the steel containers. The ships sit heavy in the water, dark shapes against the night sky. The system churns on, relentless and silent. And the man in Cali turns off the light, leaving the map in darkness, secure in the knowledge that his empire is safe because it is a ghost. You cannot handcuff a ghost. You cannot shoot a shadow. Or so he believed. But in the silence of the invisible, there is a danger. When you build a machine that is perfect, you begin to trust the machine more than the people who run it. You begin to believe that the system is infallible. And in that hubris, in that blind faith in order, lay the first hairline fracture of the foundation. For now, though, the containers keep moving. The cranes keep groaning in the cold mist, and the invisible empire sleeps soundly, wrapped in the camouflage of the mundane, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the dawn that it believes will never come. In the history of warfare, there are battles fought with trumpets and thunder, where the earth shakes and the sky turns black with smoke. And then there are battles fought in libraries, in listening posts, in the quiet, dusty corners where secrets are traded like currency. The war between the gentlemen of Cali and the warlords of Medellin was a collision of these two philosophies. It was a clash between the sledgehammer and the scalpel. To understand this conflict, you must understand the atmosphere of the two cities that birthed it. Medellin in the late 1980s was a furnace. It was a city vibrating with the manic energy of Pablo Escobar. His war against the Colombian state was loud. It was a war of car bombs detonating outside shopping malls, of airplanes blown out of the sky, of police officers gunned down on street corners for a bounty. The air in Medellin smelled of cordite and fear. Every sudden noise made heads turn. Every motorcycle engine revving was a potential death sentence. Escobar wanted the world to hear him scream. He believed that if he made enough noise, the government would deafen itself to his crimes just to make it stop. Cali was different. Cali was a cool room with the blinds drawn. While Medellin burned, Cali watched. Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela looked at Escobar's tactics not with fear, but with the disdain of a professional observing an amateur. To him, Escobar was a liability. He was bringing too much heat to the kitchen. His terrorism was bad for business, drawing the eyes of the Americans, the army, and the world press to an industry that thrived in the dark. So the decision was made. The problem had to be solved, but it would not be solved with a bomb in a public square. It would be solved with information. Gilberto and his partners mobilized an army, but not one that marched in the streets. They hired the best engineers in the country. They bought the most advanced surveillance equipment money could buy: interceptors, scanners, long-range microphones. They turned Cali into a listening post. Imagine a room in a nondescript office building in downtown Cali. The windows are taped over. The air is stale with cigarette smoke and stale coffee. Inside, rows of men sit wearing headphones, their faces illuminated by the green glow of monitors and the red lights of recording decks. The only sound is the whirring of magnetic tape spooling from reel to reel. This was the front line of the war. Here, Gilberto's men listened to the enemy breathe. They intercepted phone calls, radio transmissions, even the faint signals of walkie-talkies used by Escobar's lookouts. They built a map of the Medellin cartel not from territory but from voices. They learned who was sleeping with whom, who was stealing from the pot, who was afraid. They collected secrets like others collect stamps, knowing that a single secret placed in the right ear could be more lethal than 1,000 bullets. This era gave birth to the shadow alliance known as Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. It was a convenient fiction, a banner under which the Cali Cartel could unite paramilitary death squads, vengeful rivals, and, crucially, the Colombian police and the American DEA. It was a masterpiece of Machiavellian strategy. Gilberto did not have to pull the trigger himself. He simply had to provide the coordinates. He became the intelligence agency for the state. He fed the police the locations of Escobar's safe houses, his accountants, his hitmen. He used the law as his personal hit squad. The violence, when it came, was precise. It was surgical. A car would pull up to a curb in Medellin. 2 men would get out. Shots would be fired, quiet, suppressed pops, and a body would fall. Then the car would drive away, vanishing into traffic. There were no manifestos left behind, no claims of responsibility, just a sudden, terrifying absence where a man used to be. The tone of this war was suffocating. It was a game of high-stakes poker played in a soundproof room, where the losers didn't just lose their chips, they lost their lives. For Gilberto, this period was a test of his ultimate disguise. By day, he continued to play the role of the respectable businessman. He attended board meetings. He went to the club. He smiled for the cameras. He projected an aura of civilization, a man above the fray. But behind the eyes, the calculator was running hot. He was managing a multi-front war while maintaining the facade of a gentleman. The psychological strain was immense, though he never showed it. He justified his actions with a convenient moral narrative. He told himself, and anyone who would listen, that he was saving Colombia. He was the lesser of 2 evils. He was the immune system fighting off a cancer. "We are businessmen," he would say. "Escobar is a terrorist." This distinction allowed him to look in the mirror without flinching. It allowed him to sit in his study, sipping a glass of brandy, while his intelligence networks guided a death squad to a farmhouse in the countryside. He blinded himself to his own reflection. He did not see a killer. He saw a patriot doing the dirty work that the state was too weak to handle. But the reality of the shadow war was far grimmer than his rationalizations. It was a war of betrayal. Friends turned on friends for a suitcase of cash. Brothers sold out brothers to save their own skins. The atmosphere in the underworld became toxic with paranoia. No one knew who was listening. Every phone was suspect. Every silence was heavy with potential treachery. In the wiretap rooms of Cali, the tapes kept spinning. The men with the headphones scribbled notes. Target sighted. Sector 4. Moving north. These notes were passed up the chain, sanitized, and then handed over to the search blocks hunting Escobar. It was a slow, methodical strangulation. Escobar, the man of noise, found his world shrinking. His calls were intercepted. His supply lines were cut. His allies were picked off one by one, not in blazing gunfights, but in quiet executions in the dead of night. He was being hunted by a ghost he couldn't see, a ghost that spoke with the voice of the police but moved with the cunning of his rivals in Cali. The tension in Gilberto's office during these months was palpable. It was not the frenetic energy of combat, but the cold, hard pressure of a chess master waiting for his opponent to make a mistake. He knew that one slip-up, one intercepted call of his own, could bring the whole house of cards down. He had to be perfect. He had to be invisible. The phone on his desk would ring. He would pick it up, listen for a moment, and then say a single word. Proceed, or perhaps wait. That was the extent of his violence. A word, a decision made in a quiet room, and miles away a life would end. As the net tightened around Escobar, Gilberto felt a grim satisfaction. It was the validation of his life's philosophy. The loud man was losing. The quiet man was winning. The system, corrupted and manipulated, was doing exactly what he had paid it to do. But in the silence of his victory, a new danger was breeding. By weaponizing the state against his enemy, he had invited the vampire into his own house. He had shown the Americans and the Colombian police how effective intelligence could be. He had taught them the very methods that would one day be turned against him. The war without noise was coming to an end. The furnace of Medellin was cooling, its fire extinguished by the cold water of Cali's betrayal. But as the smoke cleared, the world would look for a new monster. And the gentleman in the high-rise office, with his ledgers and his logic, was the only one left standing on the board. The silence he loved so much was about to be broken. The air in the Val del Cauca is sweet. It is a physical sweetness, a heavy, cloying scent that hangs in the humidity, born from the thousands of acres of sugar cane that surround the city of Santiago de Cali. When the fields are burned for harvest, the smoke rises in gray columns against the blue Andes, and the ash falls like black snow on the white terraces of the mansions in the hills. In the early 1990s, after the fall of Medellin, this valley became the center of the world. To walk the streets of Cali in those days was to walk through a dream of feverish prosperity. The sun seemed to shine brighter here, reflecting off the polished hoods of Mercedes-Benzes and Ferraris that idled in the traffic of the Avenida Sexta. The pavement radiated heat, vibrating with the omnipresent rhythm of salsa, a beat that was the heartbeat of a city drunk on its own success. This was not a city under siege. There were no soldiers on the corners, no bomb craters in the asphalt. Instead, there was the manic construction of high-rises, the gleam of new shopping malls, and the bustle of a booming economy. And at the center of it all, moving through the crowd not like phantoms but like kings, were the gentlemen of Cali. Gilberto and Miguel Rodríguez Orejuela had achieved what no other criminal organization in history had managed. They had become the establishment. They did not hide in jungle bunkers or fortified compounds. They lived in the open. They walked through the front doors of the finest restaurants, the Club Colombia, and the VIP boxes of the football stadium. When they entered a room, the conversation did not stop in fear. It paused in reverence. Waiters rushed to pull out chairs. Bankers stood up to shake their hands. Politicians leaned in to whisper jokes and ask for favors. They were the toasted elite, the men who had brought the gold rush to the valley. To the average citizen, they were not drug lords. They were captains of industry. They owned the chain of pharmacies where you bought your aspirin. They owned the radio stations that played the morning news. They owned the banks where you deposited your paycheck. They were the invisible engine that kept the lights on and the music playing. This social integration was the masterpiece of Gilberto's ambition. He had woven the cartel so tightly into the fabric of Cali's daily life that to pull on the loose thread of their criminality would be to unravel the entire city. Imagine a Sunday afternoon at the Pascual Guerrero Stadium. The air is electric, thick with the smell of sweat, popcorn, and cheap beer. The crowd is a sea of red, the color of America de Cali, the team that the brothers had turned into a South American powerhouse. When the team scored, the roar was deafening, a release of collective joy that shook the concrete foundations. Up in the owner's box, Gilberto would watch, a benevolent emperor surveying his subjects. The cheers were for the goal, but in his mind they were for him. He had bought them this joy. He had bought the players, the referees, the glory. It was a seductive decadence. The city breathed in time with the cartel's lungs. Beauty pageants became national obsessions, parading young women who were often courted by the narcos, a fusion of glamour and vice that everyone recognized but no one named. The parties in the mansions of Ciudad Jardín were legendary not for their debauchery, but for their opulence. Crystal glasses clinked under the light of chandeliers imported from Europe. Live orchestras played waltzes and salsa. The conversations were about real estate, horse breeding, and art collections. In this atmosphere, the source of the money became an irrelevance. It was an open secret, discussed with a wink and a nod. Export-import, they would say. Agricultural investments. The society of Cali practiced a collective blindness. As long as the champagne was cold and the economy was hot, No one looked too closely at the white powder that paid for it all. Psychologically, this was the peak of Gilberto's hubris. He had convinced himself that the laundering was not just financial, but moral. He believed that if you poured enough dirty money into clean businesses, the money itself became clean. He believed that if you acted like a gentleman, built schools, and supported the church, the sins of the trade were washed away. He walked the streets with the confidence of a man who believes he has legitimized himself. He looked in the mirror and saw a philanthropist, a businessman, a pillar of the community. The mask he had worn for so long, the mask of respectability, had fused to his face. He could no longer tell where the performance ended and the reality began. But there is a specific quality to the light in the tropics just before the sun sets. The golden hour, photographers call it. The light turns rich and amber, making everything look beautiful, saturated, and alive. But it is also a warning. It is the last gasp of the day before the darkness falls. Cali was living in its golden hour. Beneath the surface of the salsa and the sugar, a rot was creeping in. You could smell it if you knew what to sniff for, a scent of overripeness, of fruit left too long in the sun. The complicity of the city was fragile. The smiles of the politicians were rented, not bought. The loyalty of the people was tied to the prosperity, not the men. Gilberto stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out over the valley. The lights of the city were beginning to twinkle on, mirroring the stars above. He felt a profound sense of security. He had removed his rivals. He had bought the police. He had charmed the society. He thought he had built a fortress of goodwill that could withstand any siege. He did not see the long shadows stretching out from the mountains, reaching toward him like black fingers. He did not hear the whispers in Washington, where men who did not care about soccer or salsa were looking at satellite photos and bank records. He did not realize that by becoming so visible, so integrated, he had made himself a target that could not be missed. The city of sugar was sweet, yes, but sugar dissolves in water, and the storm was already gathering over the Pacific, a cold, gray front moving inexorably toward the valley. The party was still raging, the music was still loud, and the glasses were still full. But the check was about to arrive, and the cost would be far higher than money. Gilberto turned back into the warm light of his living room, leaving the darkening city behind him. He closed the glass door, shutting out the noise, sealing himself in his air-conditioned castle. He felt safe. But safety, for a man like him, was the most dangerous illusion of all. The golden hour was ending, and the night that was coming would be long, cold, and utterly unforgiving. There is a meteorological phenomenon known as the eye of the storm. In the center of a hurricane, there is a small circle of absolute calm. The wind dies down. The rain stops. The sky clears, revealing a deceptively peaceful blue. But this stillness is a lie. It is merely the breath the monster takes before it destroys everything in its path. For Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela, the years immediately following the death of Pablo Escobar were that eye. He lived in a bubble of perceived safety, believing that his cooperation with the state had purchased him immunity. He thought the storm had passed. He was wrong. The storm had simply changed direction. With the loud, bombastic villainy of Medellin erased from the map, the gaze of the United States, that cold, unblinking searchlight, swiveled south. It focused its beam entirely on the Val del Cauca. The narrative in Washington had shifted. The gentlemen were no longer useful allies in the war against terror. They were now the primary targets in the war on drugs. The atmosphere in Cali began to curdle. The warm social buzz that had filled the restaurants and clubs slowly evaporated, replaced by a colder, sharper air. The laughter grew quieter. The handshakes became shorter. The eyes of his friends, the politicians, the bankers, the socialites, began to dart away, avoiding his gaze. Gilberto felt the change in the texture of his daily life. It started with small things. A contact in the ministry who suddenly became unavailable for lunch. A bank transfer that took a day longer to clear than usual. A strange, metallic click on the telephone line before the dial tone. The sensory details of his existence shifted from the luxurious to the paranoid. We enter the private spaces of his life, his study, lined with leather-bound books that he no longer read, his safe houses, anonymous apartments in quiet neighborhoods where the curtains were always drawn. The silence in these rooms was no longer the peaceful quiet of a man in control. It was a heavy, pregnant silence, thick with the anticipation of a knock at the door. He would sit at his desk, staring at the phone, willing it to ring, and then dreading the moment it did. The chess player looked at the board and realized with a dawn of horror that the rules had changed. The pieces he thought were his, the rooks, the knights, the bishops, were no longer moving as he commanded. Some had been captured, some had defected, and the opponent sitting across from him was no longer a rival cartel or a corrupt local government. It was the United States of America. The arrival of the DEA in force was not an invasion of soldiers, but of bureaucrats and technicians. They came with briefcases and laptops. They set up shop in the embassy and in unmarked offices. They didn't kick down doors. They audited bank accounts. They pressured visa applications. They tightened the diplomatic noose with a slow, suffocating precision. Gilberto tried to use his old tools. He sent lawyers with offers of surrender, framed as gentlemanly negotiations. "Let us keep our fortunes," the offers implied, "and we will retire quietly." He tried to send envelopes of cash to the usual recipients, but the envelopes came back unopened. The lawyers were left waiting in reception rooms. This was a terrifying new reality. He was facing a force he could not buy. For a man whose entire worldview was built on the axiom that everyone has a price, this was an ontological shock. It was like a mathematician discovering that 2 + 2 no longer equaled 4. The psychological unraveling began in earnest. The mask of the gentleman began to crack, revealing the frightened operator beneath. Gilberto's sleep became fragmented. He would wake in the middle of the night, his heart hammering against his ribs, listening to the sounds of the house. Was that a footstep? Was that a car engine idling too long on the street below? He began to move constantly, never sleeping in the same bed 2 nights in a row. The luxury of his life was stripped away, replaced by a nomadic existence of fear. He traded his mansions for nondescript flats. He traded his fleet of Ferraris for battered taxis. The king of Cali was becoming a ghost in his own city. The isolation was creeping and absolute. The society that had toasted him, that had drunk his champagne and danced to his orchestras, now recoiled. To be seen with a Rodríguez Orejuela was no longer a status symbol. It was a liability. The social invitations stopped coming. The whispers in the club were no longer admiring. They were speculative. How long does he have? Who will he take down with him? Gilberto felt the walls of his world closing in. It was a claustrophobic pressure, a physical sensation of the air running out. He realized that the city of sugar and secrets had turned bitter. The sweetness was gone. He would stand by the window of a darkened apartment, peering through the slats of the blinds. He watched the streetlights flicker on, illuminating the empty pavement. He saw a car park across the street. A man inside lit a cigarette, the brief flare of the match illuminating a face he didn't recognize. Was it a watcher, a hitman, or just a neighbor? The uncertainty was the torture. The hunt had begun, but it was not a chase scene from a movie. There were no sirens, no tire screeches. It was a slow, methodical suffocation. It was a tightening of the net, inch by inch, day by day. Gilberto sat in the dark, the air conditioning humming its indifferent tune. He thought of his ledgers, his neatly balanced columns of figures. They seemed so useless now. You cannot audit your way out of a cage. You cannot negotiate with a hurricane. The eye of the storm had passed. The winds were picking up again, howling with a fury he had never known. And this time there was no shelter. The chess player was alone on the board, his pieces scattered, his king exposed, waiting for the final move that he knew, deep down, was already inevitable. The architecture of fear is built on silence. but its dismantling begins with noise. In the final days of the Cali Cartel, the city of Santiago de Cali became an acoustic landscape of paranoia. The once celebratory rhythm of salsa was replaced by a more menacing soundtrack. The low, mechanical thrum of helicopters cutting through the humid air, the static hiss of police radios, and the terrifying, hollow boom of a battering ram hitting a reinforced door. The technological manhunt for the Rodríguez Orejuela brothers was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was not a chase through the jungle with machetes and dogs. It was a war of frequencies, a battle fought in the invisible spectrum of radio waves and cellular signals. The hunters, the elite search bloc, guided by American intelligence, had established high-tech listening posts in the heart of the city. Imagine a room, sterile and cool, filled with banks of black equipment, their LED lights blinking in a synchronized dance. Here, men with headphones sat like fishermen waiting for a nibble on the line. They were scanning the ether, plucking voices from the air. Every phone call, every pager message, every radio transmission was a potential coordinate. On the other side of the city, in the sweating, claustrophobic confines of a safe house, Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela was living a life of analog terror. He had shed the trappings of his empire. The Italian suits were gone, replaced by simple clothes. The luxury cars were parked and covered. He moved through the city in battered taxis, hunched low in the back seat, watching the world through tinted glass. He was a king in exile within his own kingdom. The irony was cruel and absolute. Gilberto had built his power on information. He had been the master of surveillance, the man who listened to everyone else. Now, the tables had turned with a vengeance. He realized with a sinking dread that his greatest asset had become his greatest liability. The network of phones and radios that allowed him to control his global business was now a web of tripwires. Every time he picked up a receiver, he felt the weight of the listener on the other end. Was it a friend? Or was it a ghost in the machine, recording his voice, triangulating his position? The telephone, once his scepter, had become a snake in his hand. The city itself felt different. It was a city under siege by its own protectors. The search block moved with aggressive impunity. Raids became a daily ritual. They kicked down doors in the middle of the night, tearing apart apartments, ripping up floorboards, drilling into walls. They were dismantling the physical infrastructure of the cartel, safe house by safe house. Gilberto moved constantly. He became a nomad of the shadows. He would stay in an apartment for 2 days, maybe 3, before the itch of anxiety forced him to leave. He slept in spare rooms, on unfamiliar mattresses that smelled of dust and other people's lives. He ate cold food out of cans. He spoke in whispers, even when he was alone, as if the walls themselves had grown ears. The sensory experience of his life narrowed down to the auditory. He became hypersensitive to sound. The distant wail of a siren would make his muscles tense. The sound of a heavy truck passing on the street would make him freeze, waiting for the screech of brakes that signaled a raid. He lived in a state of perpetual flinching. His internal monologue was a loop of calculation and regret. He thought of the bribes he had paid, the alliances he had forged. Why weren't they working? Why wasn't the system protecting him? He realized too late that loyalty is a perishable commodity. When the heat rises, the solder melts. His lieutenants, the men he had treated like family, were being squeezed. They were being offered deals. Give us the chess player and we will give you your life. Every phone call was a potential trap. Every trusted voice could be a siren song leading him onto the rocks. He began to isolate himself even from his brother, Miguel. They communicated through handwritten notes, passed by couriers who changed vehicles 3 times. It was a return to the primitive, a desperate attempt to go dark in a world that was flooded with light. The packing of his days slowed to the rhythm of a heartbeat in a hiding spot. Time stretched and warped. An hour spent waiting for a courier felt like a week. A night spent listening to the rain felt like a decade. The exhaustion was not just physical, it was existential. It was the weariness of a man who has to rebuild his reality every morning, who has to remember which lie he is telling, which name he is using, which face he is wearing. He watched his world dismantle itself, brick by brick. The pharmacies were raided, the banks were sanctioned, the radio stations were silenced. The invisible empire which he had thought was so robust, so perfectly integrated into the economy, was proving to be remarkably fragile. It turned out that you cannot build a skyscraper on a foundation of secrets. Eventually, the ground shifts. One evening, sitting in a darkened room, Gilberto heard a helicopter hovering low overhead. The rotor wash rattled the window panes. The beam of a searchlight swept across the street outside, a blinding white eye searching the darkness. He held his breath. He pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. For a moment, he was not the mastermind. He was not the billionaire. He was just a prey animal shivering in the dark, waiting for the predator to pass. The helicopter moved on. The sound faded into the distance, but the fear remained. It settled into his bones, a cold, heavy sediment. He knew with the clarity of a mathematician that the odds were shrinking. The variables were turning against him. The board was getting smaller. He looked at the phone sitting on the table. It was black, silent, innocent. But he knew the truth. It was the most dangerous object in the room. It was the leash that tethered him to his fate. And somewhere out there in the electronic ether, the hunters were listening, waiting for him to make the one mistake that would end the game. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, a prison built of signals and silence, and the walls were closing in. We are conditioned by cinema to expect the fall of a king to be a grand, operatic event. We expect the blaze of machine guns, the shattering of glass, the defiant scream from the top of the staircase as the empire burns around the protagonist. We expect a death that matches the size of the life. But reality is rarely an opera. Reality is quieter, smaller, and often deeply humiliating. The end of Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela's reign did not come with a bang. It came with a whisper, hidden in the dark, cramped space behind a piece of furniture. It is June 9, 1995. The afternoon sun is beating down on the red tile roofs of the Santa Monica neighborhood in Cali. The apartment building looks unremarkable, just another luxury residence in a city filled with them. But inside, the air is thick with the specific tension of a hunt that is ending. The search block has arrived. They do not storm the building with rockets. They swarm it with the efficiency of ants dismantling a carcass. They secure the perimeter. They move floor by floor. They are checking walls, tapping on panels, measuring the dimensions of rooms against the blueprints. Inside apartment 402, Gilberto hears them coming. There is no time to run. There is no escape route, no secret tunnel, no helicopter waiting on the roof. The walls have finally closed in. In a panic that he has spent months trying to suppress, he retreats to his last line of defense. It is not a fortress. It is a hole. He scrambles into a hollowed-out compartment concealed beneath the floorboards of a closet, or perhaps behind a false panel in a wardrobe. Accounts vary, but the sensation is the same. It is a space designed for a suitcase, not a man. He curls his body into a fetal ball, knees pressed against his chest, head tucked down. And then he waits. Let us stay in that darkness with him. Let us strip away the myth of the chess player and look at the reality of the man. The space is tiny. It smells of raw cedar wood, old dust, and the sharp, metallic scent of his own fear. It is pitch black. The air is stale and hot, quickly used up by his frantic lungs. He tries to breathe shallowly, to sip the oxygen rather than gulp it, but his heart is a drum beating a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Thump, 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 thump. It sounds deafening in the confined space. He is terrified that the sound alone will betray him. Above him, or perhaps just inches away through a thin layer of plywood, he hears the boots. Heavy military boots striking the floor. Clomp, clomp. The sound vibrates through the wood and into his bones. He He hears voices, muffled, distorted, speaking in the clipped codes of police officers. He hears the screech of drawers being pulled out and dumped onto the floor. He hears the tearing of fabric. They are destroying his sanctuary, tearing apart the last vestiges of his privacy. This is the anticlimax of the century. The man who moved billions of dollars, who corrupted governments, who ordered the deaths of enemies and the movements of massive shipments of cocaine, is now reduced to this. He is a frightened animal cowering in a box. He is not a general. He is a stowaway in his own life. The cramping begins. His legs ache. His back screams in protest, but he cannot move. To shift his weight would be to make a creak, a rustle, a sound that would end his life. He has to turn his body into stone. He has to disappear. He closes his eyes in the dark. Does he think of his empire? Does he think of the billions stashed in Panama? Or does he think only of the next breath? Does he pray? The irony is suffocating. He spent his life building a world of order, of control, of open spaces and luxury. And it has all led to this, a dark, dusty coffin where he is buried alive. The power he wielded means nothing here. You cannot bribe a police officer through a floorboard. You cannot negotiate with a search team from inside a closet. Time stretches. Minutes feel like hours. The boots move away, then come back. They are thorough. They know he is here. They can smell him. And then the inevitable happens. A fist strikes the wood. A hollow sound, a pause, another strike. Then the sound of splintering wood. Light, blinding, harsh, white light floods into his sanctuary. It stabs at his eyes, which have adjusted to the gloom. He flinches, curling tighter, an instinctive attempt to make himself smaller, to reject the reality of exposure. Hands grab him, rough hands. They haul him out of the hole like a sack of laundry. He tumbles onto the floor, blinking, disoriented, his limbs stiff and useless. He looks up at the circle of faces staring down at him. These are not the faces of men who fear him. They are the faces of men who have won. He raises his hands, not in a fist, but in surrender, and he speaks the words that will become his epitaph, the final punchline to the joke of his gentleman persona. "Don't shoot," he gasps, his voice trembling. "I am a man of peace." A man of peace, the head of the Cali Cartel, the man who orchestrated a shadow war that killed thousands. The absurdity hangs in the air, heavy and pathetic. It is the death of the ego. In that moment, stripped of his suits, his office, his phone, and his dignity, Gilberto is revealed for what he truly is, a mortal man, terrified of dying. The legend evaporates instantly. There is no mastermind here. Just a man on his knees on a carpet, surrounded by dust and debris. The handcuffs click shut. The sound is small, mechanical, final. It is the period at the end of a very long sentence. They pull him to his feet. He stumbles slightly. He looks old. He looks tired. He looks like a bank manager who has been caught embezzling, not a drug lord who ruled the world. As they lead him out of the apartment, past the overturned furniture and the ripped paintings, he doesn't look back. There is nothing to look back at. The empire didn't end with a bang. It ended with a creaking floorboard and a gasp for air. He walks out into the hallway, flanked by the police, and the camera flashes begin to pop. But the photo they capture is not of a monster. It is of a failure. And that, perhaps, is the truest punishment of all. The flashing bulbs of the press cameras are blinding, a stroboscopic assault that freezes Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela in a series of grotesque, high-contrast portraits. He is paraded before the world, flanked by heavily armed police, his face pale and drawn. He tries to smile, a weak, habitual reflex of the gentleman he used to be, but the smile does not reach his eyes. It hangs on his lips like a forgotten garment, ill-fitting and tragic. Then the doors close. The cameras are gone. The noise of the world is cut off with the heavy, metallic clang of a prison gate. Welcome to the cage of silence. The transition from absolute power to absolute confinement is a shock to the system that the human mind struggles to process. One day, Gilberto was moving chess pieces across the globe, commanding fleets of aircraft and ships. The next, his universe has shrunk to a concrete box measuring 8 feet by 10. The sensory landscape of his life has been raised. Gone is the scent of expensive cologne, the feel of silk sheets, the taste of aged brandy. In their place is the smell of industrial disinfectant, the rough scratch of a wool blanket, the metallic taste of tap water drunk from a plastic cup. The air here is dead. It does not carry the sweet scent of sugar cane from the valley. It smells of dust, sweat, and despair. Gilberto sits on the edge of his cot. He smooths the fabric of his prison uniform, an instinctive attempt to impose order on a chaotic reality. He looks at the bars. They are cold, hard, indifferent. They do not care about his bank accounts. They do not care about his political connections. They are physics made manifest, an unyielding boundary that separates him from the life he built. But even here, in the early days of his confinement in Colombia, the chess player tries to play. He believes the game is not over. The board has simply become smaller. He meets with lawyers in hushed visiting rooms. He dictates letters. He tries to pull strings that have long since been cut. He believes that if he is clever enough, if he negotiates hard enough, he can serve a few years in a comfortable Colombian prison, a golden cage, and then retire to his fortune. He clings to the illusion of control like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. But outside the walls, the empire is crumbling. His brother Miguel, the engineer, the detail man, falls soon after. He is dragged from his own hiding place, sweating and defeated. The structure they built, the invisible empire of logistics and silence, disintegrates without its architects. The lieutenants turn on each other. The roots are seized by younger, hungrier wolves. The intricate web of bribes and influence unravels, leaving only the naked truth of their crimes. And hanging over it all, darker and more terrifying than any local prison sentence, is the threat of extradition. It is the one word that makes the blood of every narco run cold. Extradition, to be sent north, to be swallowed by the belly of the American beast. In Colombia, Gilberto is a celebrity criminal, a fallen king. In the United States, he would be a nobody, a number, a statistic in a supermax facility where the sun never shines. The narrative of this chapter lingers on this creeping dread. Gilberto paces his cell. 3 steps forward, turn, 3 steps back. It is the rhythm of a caged animal. He thinks about the philosophy that guided his life. Buy the system, don't fight it. What happens when the system decides it can no longer be bought? What happens when the politicians you bribed need a scapegoat to save their own skins? He realizes with a slow, crushing certainty that he has been sold. The very machinery of corruption he greased for decades has turned its gears against him. He is the currency now. He is the offering placed on the altar of diplomatic relations. The days turn into months. The months turn into years. The packing of the script slows down here, mirroring the dragging, gelatinous quality of prison time. We feel the weight of the hours. The boredom is a physical pain. He reads the same books over and over. He stares at the same crack in the ceiling. He listens to the footsteps of the guards, trying to divine his future from the cadence of their walk. His influence is being erased. The world is moving on. New cartels are rising. New names are filling the headlines. Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela is becoming history. He is becoming a ghost story told to frighten young dealers. There is a profound, quiet desperation in this powerlessness. He tries to maintain his dignity. He shaves every day. He keeps his cell immaculate. He speaks politely to the guards, but it is a performance for an audience of none. The gentleman of Cali is just an inmate. The mask has no face to cling to anymore. One night, lying on his cot, listening to the breathing of the prison, he thinks about the irony of his life. He wanted to be legitimized. He wanted to be accepted by the establishment. And in a twisted way, he has been. He is now fully integrated into the legal system as its prisoner. He closes his eyes. He tries to summon the image of Cali at sunset, the golden light on the mountains, the music in the streets. But the image is fading. It is being replaced by the gray geometry of the cell. The silence presses in on his ears, heavy and suffocating. He is alone. The chessboard is empty, and the king has been toppled, left to gather dust in the corner of a room that no one visits. The final journey of Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela begins not on a chessboard, but on the tarmac of an airfield in Bogotá. It is the middle of the night. The engines of the DEA plane are already spinning, a high-pitched whine that cuts through the cool Andean air. He is led up the stairs, shackled at the wrists and ankles, a small, shuffling figure surrounded by giants in windbreakers. As the plane lifts off, banking north, he looks out the window one last time. Below him, the lights of Colombia are spread out like a spilled box of jewels, amber, emerald, ruby. It is the land that birthed him, the land he sought to own, the land he loved with a possessive, toxic intensity. And as the plane climbs through the cloud layer, those lights blink out, swallowed by the darkness. He is leaving the world of color and entering the world of gray. The extradition is the ultimate erasure. In Colombia, even in prison, he was Don Gilberto. He was a figure of history, a man whose name carried the weight of fear and respect. But the moment the wheels touch down on American soil, that man ceases to exist. He is stripped of his title. He is stripped of his history. He becomes federal inmate number 20,030,8018. He disappears into the sterile, unforgiving belly of the American federal prison system. The environment here is designed to crush the soul not with brutality but with banality. The walls are painted a uniform institutional cream. The floors are polished linoleum that squeaks under rubber-soled shoes. The light is fluorescent and unceasing, casting no shadows, allowing no secrets. The air is filtered, recycled, odorless. It is a vacuum. Here, Gilberto is not a mastermind. He is just an old man who doesn't speak the language well. To the young guards who patrol the corridors, he is not the chess player who outsmarted governments. He is just another geriatric inmate in a gray jumpsuit, shuffling to the cafeteria, struggling with his tray. The anonymity is profound. There are no interviews here, no journalists begging for his memoirs, no politicians seeking his counsel. The phone does not ring. The silence he once cultivated as a weapon has now become his shroud. Time, which he once managed with such precision, now stretches out into an endless flat horizon. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into years. The seasons change outside the walls: spring rain, summer heat, autumn leaves, winter frost. But inside it is always the same temperature, the same light, the same gray routine. And then the final betrayal, the body. The mind of the chess player remains sharp perhaps, but the vessel is failing. Cancer begins to bloom in his cells, a slow, silent rebellion that no bribe can stop. The man who controlled the flow of billions is now unable to control his own biology. He shrinks. The suits that once fit him so perfectly are a distant memory. Now, the prison uniform hangs loosely on his skeletal frame. His skin becomes papery, translucent, as if he is fatting away before he has even died. He spends his final years in the medical wing of a prison in North Carolina. It is a lonely place to die, far from the warmth of the Val del Cauca, far from the sound of salsa music drifting through an open window, far from the smell of roasting coffee and rain on hot asphalt. Here, the only sounds are the beeping of monitors and the hushed murmurs of nurses. He petitions for compassionate release. He wants to go home to die. He wants to be buried in the soil of Cali, but the system is deaf to his pleas. The United States does not negotiate with ghosts. The answer is silence. In these final moments, lying in a hospital bed, staring at a tiled ceiling, what does he think of his legacy? The Cali Cartel is gone, dismantled, its name a historical footnote. But the blueprint he drew, the corporate model of crime, survives. He taught the world that a cartel didn't have to be a gang of thugs. It could be a multinational corporation. He taught them about logistics, about money laundering, about the power of the invisible. The organizations that exist today, the ones moving product across oceans in submarines and drones, are his spiritual successors. They are the children of the gentleman of Cali. But for the man himself, the legacy offers no comfort. Legacy is a concept for the living. For the dying, there is only the cold reality of the room. He realizes perhaps the futility of it all. He played a long game. He sacrificed his peace, his morality, his freedom, all for a kingdom that turned to dust in his hands. He tried to impose order on a chaotic, moral universe, but the universe always corrects itself. The board was always rigged against him. The house always wins. On May 31, 2022, the end comes. It is quiet. There is no thunder, no dramatic final words, just a cessation of breath. The heart stops. The monitor flatlines. The chess player has been checkmated by mortality. And now, let us return to Cali. It is evening. The sun has set behind the Andes and the clouds have gathered, heavy and purple. The rain begins to fall. It falls on the modern glass towers of the city center, washing away the dust of the day. It falls on the crumbling ruins of the old mansions in Ciudad Jardín, where the parties used to rage until dawn. It falls on the cracked pavement of the streets where Gilberto once walked as a young man, dreaming of empire. The rain is indifferent. It does not care about kings or drug lords. It washes everything clean. Imagine the high-rise office from the beginning of our story. It is occupied by someone else now, a legitimate businessman perhaps, or a tech startup. The mahogany desk is gone. The ledgers are gone. The air conditioning still hums its low, hypnotic lullaby, but the ghost of Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela has been exorcised. The city moves on. The salsa music still plays, the rhythm driving the dancers in the clubs. The sugar cane still grows in the valley, sweet and tall. The traffic still snarls on the Avenida Sexta. Life, vibrant and messy, continues without him. The story of the gentleman of Cali is a tragedy of hubris. It is the story of men who thought they could outsmart their own souls. They built a monument to greed and polished it until it shone like gold, but inside, it was always hollow. And so, we leave them to the past. We leave the files closed on the desk. We leave the empty chair turned toward the window. We leave the silence to reclaim the space where the noise of their ambition once echoed. The rain falls harder now, blurring the lights of the city into streaks of watercolor. The image fades. The definition is lost. The name dissolves into the mist, carried away by the wind, drifting slowly, finally, into the deep sleep of history. Whatever power he held, whatever fear he inspired, whatever wealth he amassed, it is all gone. Only the rain remains.